Hello and welcome to the Overlanding podcast, a podcast dedicated to vehicle-dependent travel. I'm your host, Andy Smith. Throughout the series, I'll be chatting with adventurous people who have chosen to travel the world by bicycle, motorcycle, car and truck. The aim of the podcast is to discover what motivates people to embark on life-changing journeys and to hear some incredible stories along the way. In this episode, I chat with motorcyclist Steph Jeavons after 2.5 years on the road. Steph is currently in Canada in the middle of her epic trip, which will see her travel through all 7 continents. We discuss the challenges of motorcycling in India, the benefits of travelling by motorcycle on your own, and what happens when you run out of money. We also talk about how she got to Antarctica with her motorbike, which is a little Honda 250 named Rhonda. So without further ado, let's get started. Hello.
Hi, how you doing?
Not too bad. You'd just like to introduce yourself, please?
Okay, my name's Steph Jeavons, and I'm currently riding my CRF 250 around the world. Been on the road for 2 years and 7 months.
Okay, that's perfect. And you have the privilege of being the first person that I've spoken to who is actually on the road. All the other people I've spoken to previously have completed their trips. So you're
okay.
You're on the road, which makes
well,
you unique.
I shouldn't be on the road. I should have finished, according to my original plan, about 7 or 8 months ago now. But still going. It's still a long way to go.
Yeah. Well, that's typically how these things turn out.
It is how it happens. Yeah.
Okay. So you're on a motorbike. We've spoken to a couple of bikers recently. And for me, I always find it really fascinating because all the overland trips I've ever undertaken have been in a 4x4. So when I've been speaking to all these bikers, it's been a really, not learning curve, but I found lots of interesting things which I overlooked as a 4-wheel overlander.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's a very different perspective that you come from. And one thing I found really interesting reading your website, I can't remember what the exact quote was. You said your trip was not even really about the motorbike, which I found quite interesting. So the motorbike just happens to be a form of transport that you kind of have acquired.
Yeah, well, I am a biker. I guess I class myself as a biker. I've been into bikes a long time, but it's not. No, this journey is really not about the bike. It's about getting out there, making myself vulnerable, I guess, in a way. And the motorbike, it helps that in a way. You can sense everything, you can smell everything, you feel. If it's raining, you get wet, and if it's hot, there's no air conditioning. And I like that vulnerability. It's also a strange thing about motorbikes is that people are drawn to them. So I don't know if it's the same with 4x4s, but people seem to love motorbikes. They're inquisitive and they want to come and talk to you about it. So for me, it's been a great tool. It just happens that I love riding my motorbike, so it works all ways for me. Yeah.
Yeah. I was chatting to another biker just recently, a guy called Ed Gill, and he had a quote which was, I think, really sums up travelling by motorbike, and it provides double the fun, double the misery, and double the opportunities. And I think that's really quite relevant.
Well said.
And
yes,
I think
agree.
I think the main difference between how I travel and how you travel is that you know that kind of exposure to the elements. And I think to some degree on a motorbike, I think you're more approachable. Like I think it's very easy in a car just to wind up the window.
You put that barrier up.
Yeah,
that's it. Yeah,
and so I think on a motorbike, that's the main difference. So
it can be a love-hate relationship for sure. It's a bit like the way I describe India. It's full of adventure. Sometimes you love it, sometimes you hate it.
Yeah, actually, I just written a blog just recently, actually, all about India and that kind of love-hate affair with India, because I have exactly the same love-hate affair with India. It's an incredible country, but it can be very testing.
I have a quote actually for adventure travel, and I suppose it probably relates to India as well. But adventure travel is like a cow. Some days you get milk, some days you just get shit. Embrace the cow, you know.
Yeah, which is very relevant for discussing India. Okay, so let's step right back then to kind of how did you get into this? How did you get into overland travel?
Oh, good question. Well, it's a kind of a long story, but I'll just try and keep it a little bit brief. It was about 2008. I'd been into bikes for a long time. About 2008, I was running. I was a mortgage advisor at the wrong time of, the financial crisis and everything hit. I decided I was going to do a charity ride across South Africa, a dirt bike ride. I'd never done any dirt biking at that stage. I got some training with a load of us. Got some training from a Dakar rider, who I got on really well with. We became friends, and on a drunken night that same training weekend, we somehow agreed that when I got back from my trip, we were going to set up an off-road school together.
Yeah,
I was like, yeah, let's just do that. And drunkenly, when I got back, the first phone call I got was him going, right, let's go. So that kind of changed my life in a way. I went from mortgage advising to off-road instructing. Pretty quickly, I learned to off-road at the back behind my customers where they couldn't see me fall off, and kind of shouting ahead, going, you're doing really well, keep going, look ahead, don't look at me. I guess I built my confidence up, but I wanted to do a big trip. I just wasn't sure I was capable of it.
Yeah.
So that built up my confidence, and then over the years, I went to work with a guy called Nick Sanders. We ran tours together. Excuse me. And then it just came to a point in my life where I thought, if I don't go now, I'll never go, and so off I went.
Yeah, and that original school was down in Morocco, right? Is that correct?
No, we ran tours in Morocco as well, but it was based in Wales. So we ran off-road experience days in Wales, and then we during the winter we went to Morocco.
Yeah,
wisely.
Yeah, much warmer in the winter. It's nice down there. and I think Morocco is. I don't know, it's kind of the gateway drug, isn't it, to overlanding? I think a lot of people from England head down to Morocco and because it's easy to get to, and then they get a bit of a taste of possibly what's out there. And I think Morocco is an incredible place because it's so diverse but so close.
Absolutely, that's exactly what I was going to say. It's convenient, but it's a complete change of culture and scenery, and you can't get much different than the UK or the rest of Europe really. So and there's so much adventure to be had, and you can pretty much go anywhere. So especially when you've got dirt bikes, or a decent overland truck or whatever, you can just go anywhere. There's no fences or gates to get in the way. So it's kind of cool for that. Yeah.
And I think that certainly that kind of introduction to the overland travel is the way to go. And it can be incredibly liberating to go to a country where a fence isn't a concept, and you kind of get there and you're just like, oh, there's no fences here. Wow, this is doable. Cool. So how long was it then between you kind of did you wind that up, or were you continually doing that until you left on this trip?
I wound it up, and then I worked for a year, I think, or maybe just under, with Nick Sanders, just earning money and saving and planning my trip. So I'd set the dates and so worked with Nick as I was doing that, and then left. My original plan was to leave on my 40th birthday. I thought I've got to set a date, and I think that was the key factor in me actually leaving and genuinely going for it. Was setting a date, otherwise these things can roll on forever. The planning, and nothing's perfect. I suppose it's like having a baby. There's never a perfect time. So I just spent a year planning it and building up to it. Set the date. I actually left a year early in the end, and because of circumstances, and went for it. Left from the Ace Cafe in March 2014, and have never looked back since.
Yeah, and your kind of motivations for the trip, were you like I don't know. Were you just inquisitive about the world, or were you thinking, or was it the personal challenge, or what's kind of your main motivation?
A bit of everything, I guess. I had to take you back 30 years. No, sorry, not that long. 24 years, 23 years. I had a baby. 23 years ago, I had a baby, and I was only young. I was a child myself. I was 18, and that limited what choices I had for a while. And I decided that I was going to get the job, buy a house, make sure I was secure, do all those things that I needed to do to provide for my son and to give that security that we both needed. And that went fine, but I always had this dream of not riding, but going around the world. I always had this inquisitiveness about the rest of the world, and just felt I wanted to get out there.
Yeah.
And so I delayed it for 18, 19 years or whatever. And by then I'd got big into bikes, and I'm also big into wildlife. And so I've said this a million times. Originally, I was going to ride to Borneo to see the orangutans. That was my plan.
Yeah.
So it was that wildlife, riding motorbikes, and the sense of freedom that was really appealing to me.
Yeah.
But the trip just got bigger and bigger in my head, and so it was, from Borneo to Australia, and then I started deciding I was going to ride to 7 continents. Why not?
Yeah, yeah. And actually, one thing that's been on my mind, and it hasn't come up in conversation actually. One thing that really inspired me, and I haven't mentioned this to any bikers yet, and I'm just going to float it out there and see if it's something you can kind of associate with. One thing that really inspired me was actually Ewan McGregor and Charlie Boorman, and I'd ridden motorbikes as a youngster, but not really as an adult. I grew up in Guernsey in the Channel Islands, and the motorcycle licensing laws were very different, so it was easy to ride a motorbike from quite a young age. Mm-hmm. But their trip kind of that TV series had quite a big influence on me. Is it the same for you? Were you aware of it before you left on your trip?
I was aware of it, and I know Charlie. We've met a couple of times, but I've got to say sorry, Charlie, but it wasn't actually them that inspired me. Although, and the same with kind of the other people that I've met in the industry who are big names who I really respect now. I hadn't really kind of looked. I hadn't done all that research and watching hours of other people's adventures. Really, it was only later that I got to know people and meet people that who maybe now inspire me. Who are great. Have done amazing trips. But it wasn't what originally inspired me. I think probably the inspiration was just that wanting that sense of freedom and having a goal to work towards when times were tough when I was younger. It was, okay, you've got to work hard now. But one day, and that was what it was all about for me. It was that sense of freedom. I haven't watched the whole of Charlie and Ewan's programs. I've watched bits of them, and they are brilliant. I mean, they get mixed reviews, I guess, but they did inspire a massive amount of people to get out there and buy bikes. And, they did it with big bikes and a big budget, and they get knocked for that sometimes. But I think as long as you're doing it, it doesn't matter how you do it,
Yeah.
So yeah, they've got a lot of people are grateful for what they did because they put it into everyday households and reached out to many people who have since gone out and had great adventures because of it. So
yeah, and what I liked about it was because I saw it when it was originally on TV, and then it completely left my consciousness for a long time because I can't remember what year it was. Maybe it was early 2000s. I think it came out, okay. And it wasn't until I'd kind of met my wife, and then we had been on a major, kind of made some quite big life-changing decisions, and then ended up going on a road trip, and then it kind of came back into my consciousness again, and then I rewatched the series, having kind of got into overlanding through a slightly other route, and then ended up watching the series again. And then it became something I was, quite inquisitive about, and then I looked it up, and I think certainly for Charlie, I think one thing that's quite interesting is it changed his life quite profoundly, that trip, I think, because I don't know if he's ever gone back to acting, has he? He's certainly I think he's
No,
been on motorbike trips since, right?
he does a lot of tours now in Australia and all over the place. The reason I met him last time we saw each other was he was interviewing me for a documentary he was doing about people who do crazy things on motorbikes. And I don't think that's ever been aired. I think he kind of got shelved because another project came along. He now works with Triumph, I think. Originally he was BMW. He's now gone over to Triumph. And he's at most of the motorbike shows in the UK every year, plugging something or other. But yeah, his whole life has become about motorbikes these days. And he's a good rider too, and he's a nice guy.
Yeah, and the reason I kind of brought that up is because I think the things that make some of these podcasts interesting are the fact that people undertake these kind of big life-changing trips, and they are quite life-changing, and I think that's where the beauty of this podcast lies to some degree. And it's taken me a little while to suss that out as the more podcasts I record, and I'm slowly starting to refine them and kind of get to the essence of, I don't know, what people are interested in, and kind of it's a real skill which I'm still trying to learn, how to pick out people's stories, I guess, and find out where the interesting stories lie. And one thing I've really enjoyed is just diving back in and researching other people's trips, which is something I did before I left on our trip back in 2010. I spent a lot of time kind of looking at other people's trips and researching people's websites. And one thing I really liked about your trip was the kind of amount of videos you're making. And the way you're kind of documenting your trip, I guess. How before you set off, did you make a conscious effort to think, this is how I'm going to document my trip?
No, well, I had originally thought it was going to be mostly down to writing. I had no video skills or anything, but this video diary software came up, which meant that it was film it live on the side of the road. It was called Punked, and I don't use it now because it's a monthly cost, which unfortunately I've had to kind of limit. But of course, the longer you go, but it was a great piece of software, and basically it just meant that I could record on the side of the road a 2-minute video clip, compress it and upload it, and it put on the map where I was recording it. And it was a genuine account of how I was feeling then. There was no editing. It had to go as it was. And so it was good at capturing those little moments of excitement or depression or freezing cold or boiling hot or whatever. But I don't, like I said, I don't use that now. But things have evolved, and of course they do. So now I'm learning all the time. I'm no photographer, but I'm trying to get better at it, and I am getting better at it. I'm no videographer, but I'm now trying to use a lot of my old footage to edit and put together some decent stuff, and it's really good fun. I think it's all part of the journey. If you enjoy that kind of thing, then I have a bad memory as well, I've got to say. So if I don't write it down or film it, it's gone.
Yeah. I can relate to that one.
Yeah, for sure. So it's great to look back on your memories in that way. So
yeah, and then ultimately, I guess, kind of undertaking things like that, like by filming your trip, can actually lead into kind of new professions. I certainly know people who have gone into or had interests, and they've decided to film their interests just as a way of documenting it. And then quite often a few people I know have actually gone into becoming documentary filmmakers or becoming professional photographers as a through an ulterior kind of interest. So yeah, those skills I think are good ones to pick up along the way.
Well, it's great. It's great to have some. It's fun to learn, right? And so you're traveling around the world, and if you're learning that as well as cultures and that kind of thing, it's good fun. If you find out you enjoy it, or somehow turns out you're good at it, then then why not move forward with it? So
yeah. And learning about new cultures there, that brings me. Okay, let's talk about that for a while. I think your route kind of took you down through southeastern Europe, right? And then do you go through Iran?
I went through Iran, yes, and then instead of going through Pakistan, I went across to Dubai. Originally, I was going to go through Pakistan, but there was a couple of it. Well, there's it's always a little bit dodgy, but lots of people go through. But there was an incident that happened just before I was due to go through, and so I changed my route and went through Dubai, and then over to India from there.
Yeah, and how did you find India on a motorbike? That must have been quite challenging.
Challenging, yeah, for sure. It's a good word. It was one of my biggest fears, India. I've got to admit, I was terrified, and going into each country, usually people say to you, before you cross the border, people usually say, "Oh, be careful of." Their neighbours. Everyone's scared of their neighbours, so be careful of the Arabs, or be careful of the Persians, or be careful of the whatever, or be careful of the Turks, or whatever. When I got to India, they're going, be careful of the Indians, So, okay.
And that was the first time you'd been to India?
It was the first time I'd been, and so I arrived in Mumbai like a frightened rabbit. I must admit, I must have looked terrified, and I'm not easily intimidated, but I was intimidated, and the amount of people, the heat. It was the hottest time of the year in India, and getting my motorbike out of the customs and hitting that road, I looked like an alien. I was white-skinned, big GoPro pointing out on top of my helmet, and I probably looked pretty frightened. I must admit, I was trying to look mean, but no, I think you have to just get used to it, to dive in and get used to it, and before you know it, you're thinking, wow, this is like playing a computer game. This is great fun. But also you got to be careful, because at times you can get very stressful, and every single day is a challenge. Every single day you have to really be on the ball. And every day you feel like, whoa, I nearly died. Whoa, I nearly died. All those near misses constantly.
Yeah.
And so it can stress you out after a while as well. So
I think approaching from the west, you kind of acclimatise to the driving gradually, because as you travel through Eastern Europe and then through Turkey and Iran, the driving kind of generally gets worse and worse, so it kind of acclimatises you for the driving in India to some degree, but it certainly India is next level. I think it's got to be one of the worst places to drive. How did you get? How did you get on with customs in? Do you ship into Mumbai?
Oh. I shipped into Mumbai. Yeah, that was great fun. It took. I got there and they said, "This would take 4 days, madam." I was like, "Why 4 days?" And they said, "This is India, madam." And I said, "No, I'm sorry, I can't have that." And I shamefully admit that I lied and said that I had some big press conference the next day, and I had to get my bike out that day. And of course I would I would plug anybody who wanted to help me get my bike out, and so there was no bribery, there was no nothing. It was just a downright lie, really. Although I did have a motorcycle travellers meet to go to, and I was going to do a presentation in a couple of days after that. So I exaggerated, I guess. And after much, everybody pulled together and made an effort in those customs, and they fed me and watered me as well. And about 12 hours later, I was leaving with my motorbike, very hot, very tired, and almost at my limit. I almost did a Steve McQueen out of there at one stage, because it was just unbelievably hot, and I was like, just let me go. And eventually we got out the same day, which I think is probably unheard of. So.
Yeah, that's some kind of world record, I think. From what I've heard, and certainly from my personal experience, we were 4 weeks, I think it was. So yeah, that's pretty good. I'm incredibly jealous, actually. And India then. How did you find India? Was it kind of, did it meet your preconceptions about what India was going to be like?
Well, my preconceptions were mostly of fear, or my before I arrived, it was just I was terrified, as I said, and as always, the anticipation is worse than the actual event, because when you get into something like that, of course, people, like I've just said it myself, we've both just said it. India, oh, it's a different level, it's terrifying, oh, you nearly died every day, and so anybody who's about to enter India is going, really? Do I want to do this? And that's what I had being fed to me all the time, of course. But when you get into a situation, you just deal with it. And before you know it, it's over and you're buzzing and you're thinking, yay, look what I just did, And it is a love-hate relationship of all the countries that I've been through. India has given me my worst, my best times. The culture is amazing. There are some shocking things you'll see, but some beautiful things. And it really is an adventure to ride through. The traffic, you get through it, and a small bike, I think, helped because I could nip through and squeeze into gaps. And it was an experience that I would repeat, and I have no regrets of going through. But by the time I'd spent 8 weeks there, I was desperate to get into the mountains by then. The crowds were too much. I'm a Welsh girl. I'm not a city girl. And the crowds were just getting too much for me by then. So I was very keen to get into the cool mountains and, less people. And the Himalayas, of course, were just a whole different game again. It was wonderful. I absolutely loved it.
And when you're traveling, are you typically camping or you're staying in hotels? Or I certainly know from chatting to people like yourself that the biker community is one that's incredibly strong, and it doesn't take long before you've got invites left, right, and centre to go and stay with people. So how do you normally deal with that?
Well, it's been absolutely amazing that as you said about the biker community, that is, has been a great help even before I left. And this is another good reason to write a blog for your memories, for sharing, and for making contacts along the way. So before I left, I was getting invites from people in different parts of the world saying, when you come through our country, come and stay with us. Asia was a really good one for that. There are lots of bikers out there in Asia, and they want to meet you, they want to take you for food, they want to show you the best roads to ride. Actually, sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming. And some countries you get lots of that, and some countries you get none at all. So I've stayed with lots of bikers along the way. I've done a lot of camping. I've couch surfed. I've a little bit of everything. And saying yes to people is the important thing as well. If there's one thing about getting lost is if you haven't booked somewhere in advance, then you can't get lost, right? So so that's a good tip. Keep going until you find somewhere to sleep, and that also allows you to accept offers that come up along the way. Going back to Iran, that was an amazing place to travel through, because everywhere you go, people are almost running you off the road so they can take you home and feed you. So allowing yourself to be open to those opportunities is one of the best things you can do on a trip like this. And also, of course, it saves you a lot of money, so you can live pretty cheaply with a tent and goodwill.
Yeah, that experience you just described then in Iran is definitely one I can relate to. We had so many people just pulling up alongside the car. And at times we had people throwing things inside the car from their moving car. Like, people would chuck sweets in through the window, or like just want to give you everything they've possibly got because you're a foreigner.
I would be riding along a desert road somewhere on my motorbike, and a car would come up alongside me and do exactly that. They would be holding bottles of water out at 60 miles an hour, trying to pass it to me as they come up alongside the motorbike. I'm like, I'm okay. No, you water, Or they'd be shouting, Nescafe. They couldn't speak English, but they'd just be follow me, Nescafe. I'm like, oh, okay, that would be nice. Often I did, so it was great.
Yeah, and I think kind of traveling in this way, by any wheels necessary, I think is just a great way to discover the country, and you will find yourself in just the situations like we've just described. What, just out of the entirety of your trip so far, are there other situations or examples you can think of where you wouldn't have got into that situation if you hadn't have been on a motorbike, and where the end result is something just incredible that you would just never have experienced before? I'm sure you've got a few.
Which one do I pick to tell you here? I mean, there have been so many, and they've changed throughout the different experiences. But India is probably a prime example of that, being caught up in the middle of a pilgrimage that I had no idea. I was completely oblivious. Great planning from me here, as ever. I just kept riding and got caught up in the middle of one of the biggest Hindu pilgrimages in India, and it sounds horrific. It took me I did 10 kilometers in 8 hours, and because the volume of traffic and people and stampedes and all this was unbelievable, and the heat, I nearly collapsed several times. I thought I wasn't going to make it out alive. Eventually I got to a police barricade, and they let me through, and I was stuck there for 16 hours in a hotel room where the police were held up. And it sounds horrific, and it was horrific. But by the time I'd got some water and got some food inside me and had a cold shower, I was dancing around in my underwear in the hotel room, listening to AC/DC, going, "I'm alive," and I got some of it on video. Yay! So it was the best feeling ever, and I would never have chosen that, but I found myself in that situation, and to come out of it alive, I guess, is that it's like wearing a pair of tight shoes. You take them off, and the sense of relief is worth it.
Yeah.
So many situations. The great thing about motorbike is that you can go off the beaten track and find yourself in some random places. And like I said, people seem to like motorbikes. They get drawn to it, and there's a lot of goodwill around motorbikes. So, people will help you lift it up and put it in their living room so it's safe, and then feed you. And many great experience thanks to that bike.
Yeah, and I think, especially traveling through countries like Iran and India, I think, not to make it a gender issue, but certainly being a woman on a motorbike is something really quite unique in those countries, which I think it would also, again, make you an incredibly interesting person for those people to talk to, because ultimately they're just as inquisitive as we are about the world. And it's not very often a white girl on a motorbike rides through some of these villages, probably.
No, they're pretty shocked, and sometimes they just sort of stand and stare with their mouths open, and you're kind of like, hello. People love it, and I think they get this kind of not on my watch mentality, and people want to protect you and look after you, and I think sometimes it can be a bad thing to be sometimes it's harder being a woman, sometimes it's easier being a woman, and I can think of many situations where it's been a good thing. Yeah. I've certainly never felt vulnerable. Well, I have felt vulnerable many times, but I've certainly never felt threatened because of of who I am. But certainly there is a lot of interest, just a motorbike on its own, but a white woman on a motorbike, as you said, is something to talk about.
Yeah, actually, it's something I've not really thought about before, but actually just now when I've been pondering what we've just been discussing, it must really blow some people's minds, actually, because the political situations in some of these countries and women's rights in some of these countries, for us to go to these countries, we see incredibly mind-blowing things, especially in India, every day. But it must also blow their minds to see a woman come through riding a motorbike. It must, I think that cultural exchange is something that's incredibly valuable.
For sure. And sorry, interrupting you there, but that's the interesting thing I found is that most women will say if they're traveling alone, they will say they're married, and my husband is coming along any minute, especially in Muslim countries, and that's what I was advised to do. And maybe, perhaps naively or stupidly, that I decided not to do that, and just to be very honest and take my chances, so to speak, and say no, I'm married to my motorbike was usually my response. When somebody says, "You married?" Because you're always asked, "Are you married?" and "Where's your husband?" and "Why aren't you married?" And so I'd say, "I'm married to my motorbike," and that usually resulted in high fives, especially from the women,
That's really nice.
And the guys loved it, and they were just like, hey, you're really, and whether you could speak their language or they could speak yours or not, you got the message across. And it was always a very warm, very yeah, right on, girl, kind of a response everywhere I went. So I'm really glad that I was honest about who I am and what I was doing, because I never would have seen that response otherwise.
Yeah. It's funny, the questions that people ask as well, and it really says a lot about their culture. One question we always got asked, my wife and I, did we have any kids? Like I'm 40 now, and we don't have any kids, and that people would look in the car and they would be asking for children, expecting to see children in the car, and we don't have any kids, and we tell them we didn't have any kids, and then just the look of dismay on their faces.
What's wrong with you?
Yeah, as the guy stood there with his 9 children, kind of staring into the car. And it really, I really enjoy those kind of cultural exchanges, because I think as people who travel, we have a curiosity about the world, and we have the luxury that we can travel and go and see the world. But a lot of these people don't have that luxury. So I think
Absolutely.
I think the fact it's a two-way cultural exchange is actually it's something that hasn't really occurred to me until just having this conversation. But that I think that's really important too, and I think
absolutely that's the way it should be, and it can be tiring sometimes. But I think it's worth spending that time with people, trying to explain a little bit. I can remember being in Kurdistan, sharing learning about Kurdish traditions, but also they were learning about Welsh traditions. It was a great experience and a great sort of swapping of stories. It was lovely.
Yeah, and managing to find a way to communicate is always interesting as well. And you will always find a way. It doesn't matter which country you're in. If people have that openness and kind of willingness and curiosity, then you will find a way to communicate, whether it be through drawings or kind of whatever else.
Right here now, while I remember, if anybody is listening to this and thinking of doing a journey, let me advise you of one tip, if I could just give one tip, and that would be take a photograph of a toilet, because it'll never leave me having to stand on the side of the road surrounded by a load of guys miming peeing, because that was the only thing left to do. To get my message across. I need a toilet. Where is the toilet? I tried everything, but the last resort was to have to, miming that I needed a pee. These things don't leave you. So take a photograph of a toilet.
And that's really good, actually, because someone sent me an email during the week, and I'd floated out on social media, is there any way we can improve the podcast? Is there any subjects people would like covered? And someone suggested that I ask a question, what is the one piece of equipment that you would always take with you that you would recommend to anyone? And you've actually answered the question without me having to ask
there you go.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't think I've ever been in a situation where I've had to mime that, but I've certainly ended up.
It's easier for guys, right? You can just turn your back. I did start with a shiwi, but that confuses people even more. So you've got a white woman on a motorbike on her own, standing up having a pee. It's like it really doesn't go down too well.
Okay, moving swiftly on. No, that's that. Well, it's interesting, and it's people have these questions. It's certainly people who are outside the realm of overlanding. Like, obviously, if you're involved in overlanding, you know the answers to a lot of these questions. And I remember before we left on our trip, we did a couple of talks at a few of the local schools, and we took the car in, and our car's got a water tank, and we've got the luxury of having a shower and stuff if we need it, which kind of screws on the outside of the car. It's a small 4x4, but we have the option to have a shower if we want one outside in the open. But all the kids, that was the first question they would ask, is, where'd you go to the toilet? And like that kind of curiosity, and then when you explain to like a 12-year-old that actually you just sometimes dig a hole, or you go and have a crap behind a tree, or wherever you are, whatever, and whichever way you have to do it.
Just, it's funny how children's minds work as well along the way, and what they kind of, and depending on which country they're in. There was you just reminded me of very, very quickly. I'll just tell you, I have a scar on my hand, and on the palm of my hand, and I'd gone to an orphanage in Guatemala, and I was doing a little kind of translated talk and showing them pictures and stuff, and one of the kids noticed the scar on my hand, and she asked me, "Was that from making tortillas?" That was her first question. Was that tortillas? I was like, "Oh no, it wasn't. I wish it was, but no." So it's lovely talking to kids as well around the world.
Yeah, and again, the kids are quite often the first point of contact as well when you're in countries, because they have this inquisitive mind where they will see something odd driving down the road, and they will just run to the side of the road and stare and stop and kind of chase after you if you stop.
Absolutely, and they have a great way of communicating too. It's really easy to communicate with kids for some reason.
Yeah.
So
yeah. So after India, you headed down through Southeast Asia.
Yeah. Well, I went up as far as I went up to Leh Ladakh in the Himalayas, aka Biker's Paradise, and then across to Nepal.
And how were the conditions up there? What time of year was that?
In Ladakh?
Yeah.
It was around, I don't know, about July time, I think. Yeah. And it was pretty hot. There was snow at the very top, because I did the highest motorable road in the world, or whatever, arguably. And there was snow up there. It was boiling hot at the bottom and pretty cold at the top. But otherwise, the conditions were pretty good. I had I camped up overnight on one of the 2-day passes, and woke up to a lot of rain, and so got a lot of landslides and that kind of thing to deal with, and river crossings that were flowing a little bit more than I would have liked. But hey, that's part of the adventure, right? It was good fun, and it's amazing wherever you go. You think you're going to be on your own in the wilderness, and often somebody pops up to help you when you fall off your bike, or you need something lifting or something, So, it was one of my favourite parts of the world, actually.
And was that the first time you'd been in landscape like that? Because certainly those really high altitude kind of plateaus and mountains are absolutely stunning. And had you experienced anything like that before?
Not quite like that. I've been lucky enough to ride up in the Andes previously in Peru, and in the Atlas Mountains in Morocco. But everywhere is slightly different, and the Himalayas was just, it was breathtaking. It was just such a wonderful feeling. Me and my motorbike on the dirt roads riding up there, and just everywhere you looked. And I really wish, one of my regrets is that I didn't stop more and take pictures and film more. And, I was too busy just going, wow, this is awesome,
Yeah.
And not being sure what's around that next corner all adds to the excitement, of course, as well. And, highly recommend that as a riding destination for sure.
Yeah. And as far as the riding goes, was it challenging? Or I saw a great film a couple of years ago of a group of Indian guys who set out riding up there, and they were obviously all riding Enfields, and it was a really cool kind of homemade film, and it just filled me with a sense of wonder when I saw it, and I was just like, wow. You guys have just picked the worst possible motorbike to try and ride up there, but they got through it, and it was just incredible.
Yeah, there's actually quite a few Enfields go up there, because that seems to be all there is in India.
Yeah,
no, it's not that challenging. It depends on your point of view, I guess. I mean, once you've ridden all the way there from the UK, I guess it's not that challenging. But it depends on the weather as well, of course. And like I said, the river crossings can be a little bit flowy, for want of a better word. And when it's been raining, the mud, and you do get the landslides. But I didn't find any of it too technically challenging, really. It's just it's a good challenging.
And how do you get on physically? How many hours do you generally ride a day, or does it really vary depending on the conditions and where you are?
Yeah, it varies massively depending on where I am, and probably it can be anything from as much as 13 hours in a day, which would be very extreme, to just a couple of hours. It does massively depend on how I feel, where I am. Sometimes you have to keep going, other times you don't want to keep going, and so and it depends on the terrain that you're trying to cross as well, of course.
Yeah.
So.
And physically, do you feel the strongest you've ever had? Because you've been on the road now for 2 years, right?
2 years, 7 months. Don't forget those 7 months. I've earned them.
Yeah, definitely.
I actually feel very strong now. The last 9 months has been a slightly different story. I ended up with some injuries. I got hit by a truck in Colombia. Although that makes it sound more dramatic than it was. I got knocked off my bike by a truck that sort of tapped me.
I did wonder, because I saw lots of videos of you having injections in your shoulder, and I'd scouring your website to try and find out what had happened.
I got knocked off and landed on my shoulder, and then it was kind of okay, but it was hurting a little bit, and I kept going, of course, as you do. And by the time I got to Mexico, I couldn't really move my arm very much above the bars, so it was extremely painful all the time by then. And but I kept going. By the time I got to the US, across the border, I'd run out of money and was in a lot of pain. But the amazing biker community stepped in, and as soon as I crossed the border, they were like, come and stay with us, come and stay with us. And they also helped me to organise presentations along the way to earn money.
Some money, yeah.
And get some rest in between in comfortable places that weren't costing me any money, and home cooking. It was wonderful. The Americans were just wonderful to me. And but I was in a lot of pain, but I kept going. By the time I got to Canada, I ended up in ER with a damaged spine, probably from holding myself slightly awkwardly because of my shoulder, and also the vibrations of the bike, and whatever, just sitting on a motorbike for 2 years, I guess, probably didn't help. So I went through a lot of injections in my spine, in my shoulder, lots of rehab, physio, and that kind of thing, and now I'm not 100%, but I'm 40, how old am I? 41. I guess I'm never going to be 100% anymore, but I'm feeling pretty good. And the most important thing is that my mental energy is back, and I'm not fighting pain constantly, which is pretty tiring.
Yeah.
So now I've got more. I feel, I'm just like, rah, come on, let's go do some more exciting stuff.
Yeah, I can certainly tell that. I don't know, just from the tone of your voice and your intonation, that you are incredibly energetic and sound like you can't wait to hit the road again. And one thing you mentioned there was money, and I don't know if you want to talk about it or not. It's entirely up to you. But that's certainly one question we get asked by everyone all the time whenever we're on the road. Is
of course,
you must be incredibly rich to do this. And I always say, well, no, actually, me and my wife sold everything we own, and we're incredibly skint.
Yeah.
It can be very deceptive. People think you're incredibly rich. But how did you initially fund your trip? If you don't mind me asking, if you don't want to talk about it, I'm happy to go somewhere else. But
I don't know. I'm an open book. I don't mind at all. But originally, I asked that myself sometimes. Like, how am I still going? What happened here? I've run out of money several times on the road, but I guess you have to just be, you have to get on with it and find ways. And to start with, I rented my house. I've now sold it. But to be honest, there wasn't much money coming back to me after I paid my debts off. But but there's no outgoings in the UK, which is the most important thing.
Yeah.
But I also got a little bit of money left over from my business. I got some sponsorship. I worked in the motorbike industry, so I had some contacts. And it's, as they say, it's not about what you know, it's who you know. And that is true to a point, because but people who you've built relationships up with are going to trust you more than a stranger approaching them, and that's why it helps. So I'd done business with a lot of people, and so they'd give me equipment to help me along the way. Getting money is a harder thing if you're looking for sponsorship, and these days even harder because there's a lot of competition. But I was lucky; I got a little bit to help me on my way. and all that combined got me going. I set a budget for 18 months, knowing I'd probably be longer. Sorry, 16 months, knowing I'd probably be longer, knowing that my budget was probably way too tight for the reality. But hey, you're not going to solve every problem until you get out there and get on with it. And I ran out of money in Colombia originally, and then I did an online raffle, which earned me a little bit to keep going to the US. And then I did a load of presentations. And I also write for motorbike magazines. I write a monthly column for Ride magazine.
Yeah.
I write for ADV Moto here in the US. And I do presentations where I can at shows and that kind of thing. And anything, really, to earn a buck or two. I think if you can sing, then busk. If you can trade, if you have a trade, then trade it. I think you just got to find a way to earn little bits here and there, and actually it's the least of my worries. I don't stress about it. I'm in no way in a position to fund the rest of this trip and to get home, but I know that I'll find a way, and that's if you're willing, there's always a way.
Yeah, and that's something that has typically come up in conversation with other people I've spoken to on the podcast, is things have a way of working themselves
working
out.
Yeah.
And not necessarily just money, but all things, in any kind of predicaments you're in. And I think traveling in the way that we do means we become very adaptable, and you kind of play up to your skills, which is essentially what you're doing. You're finding out what just there when you said, if you can sing, then busk. And I think people are always trying to find ways to monetize their traveling so that it can be sustainable. I think certainly writing for magazines is a good option. That's something we've certainly done in the past, which certainly helps. And in other countries, that money, which may not necessarily be a lot of money in your home country, actually goes a really long way. If you're in India, for example.
Absolutely. And there's something very kind of raw about traveling on a really tight budget like that. And, I don't want to take away from people who are traveling with lots of money, because I'm sure they're having a good time too. But it's definitely added some flavor to my adventure. And I think most of us work on a tight budget to, the cheaper you can live, the longer you can go. And, that all adds to the challenge, and it puts you in positions where you might not otherwise be. If I'd have had the money, I might have chosen a hotel room here, or I might have gone somewhere else there, and actually having to accept those offers of sleeping on someone's floor, or putting that tent up that night even though you were tired, but waking up the next morning to a beautiful sunset or that clear night sky, and there's something very raw about having to trade and earn your money and think about what your next step is and living hand to mouth. It all sounds very romantic, and it's not always romantic, of course, but I don't know. I've learned a lot about what skills I do have, and actually, I own less than I've ever owned in my life. I think everything I own is on my bike, but I'm happier than I've ever been. I have nothing to lose now, So that's kind of a good thing too. Although I'm probably a little bit arrogant in saying this, because not everybody has those opportunities in the first place. I will probably never end up homeless and on the streets, because I'm lucky to have a great network of friends back in the UK and now all over the world who if ever I got into serious trouble, would pick me up and bring me home and put me on the couch or whatever. So I really do appreciate, I'm saying all this with that in mind as well. I'm very, very lucky to be in this position. So
yeah, I certainly I think the main point to pick out of what you just said was that you wouldn't find yourself in such interesting situations if you had more money, and I think that really is key, and that's where the adventure is, and that's ultimately, I think, where the things lie that we're ultimately looking for. People don't go on these trips for a luxurious holiday. They go on these trips because they want adventure, and they want to see the world, and they want to experience new cultures. And actually having very little money actually forces you into a corner where you actually do have to do that. And I think that alone is incredibly liberating. That, in combination with not actually having many possessions, is probably the most liberating thing you can do as a Westerner, I think. It's
it makes for very rich memories, to sound a little bit corny, but it really does. I think it definitely adds to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
So that kind of leads me on nicely, as you know, you're currently on the road, and obviously you've been on a long journey, you know, a kind of metaphorically as as well as you know, however many thousand miles you've done now. But what in the last 2 years, what have you really ultimately learnt about yourself? Have you had any kind of eye-opening moments where you've gone, actually, I'm this kind of person now, and you are, you know, completely different to the person who left?
I do ask myself this a lot, and I get asked it a lot as well. I'm still not sure what the answer is, but I have changed, yes. I did have to ask myself, have I changed? And if so, how? It's not obvious, and I'm definitely not a completely different person to what I was. I was pretty open, pretty easygoing. But now I worry less. I feel like the world has become a much smaller place for me. I'm more sociable because I think as I was getting older, I was getting less sociable and enjoying my own company a lot more. And I still enjoy my own company, and I do have to. I guess I'm an introvert, really, so I have to re-energize sometimes in my tent or whatever.
But you spend a lot of time on your own on the bike, though, as well, right? So that's
absolutely. That's my like my yoga time, really. My meditation time is my helmet time.
Yeah.
But and so I'm loving that, you know, everything's fresh and meeting new people all the time is wonderful. But what I have learned is actually, funnily enough, I always thought I had kind of a bit of a hippie mentality, maybe, for want of a better description, that, you know, this dream of just wandering aimlessly around the world. And what I have learned is that I'm not that person. Some people are. But I don't aimlessly is the key word there. I have to have a goal. I have to have a mission. And so, like originally riding to Borneo to see the orangutans, it's like when I go for a walk, I like to have a dog with me because then I have a purpose, you know.
Yeah.
And it's the same with this. I became 7 continents. I set myself challenges and goals along the way, whether they be the big ultimate challenges or the small ones on a daily basis. And I'm aiming for somewhere, and I think I found what I'm looking for. I found a certain peace within myself and a happiness. But I don't think this will be something that I want to do forever. And riding aimlessly around, no. I want to have goals and missions in my life and to be moving forward. So yeah, that's probably what I've learned the most.
Yeah, that's cool. That's really good. And I'm just aware that we're approaching the hour, and that typically would be a natural point to stop. But you did just raise one thing there in the last thing you said, which drew me to my piece of paper. And I have the words Antarctica written in really big letters with a question mark next to it. And you actually answered my question within there. You know, you had a goal, you wanted to go to 7 continents. Because originally I was thinking, why does she want to ride a motorbike there, really? But you've actually just answered that question. And I will add a couple more questions onto that, because I'm really curious about that. How was that?
It was amazing. Although I guess the memories are sometimes better than the actual event, because crossing the Drake Passage, you know, hey, I've done it. I don't want to do it again. I'm not a sailor. That's one thing I've learned about myself as well, is I'm definitely not a sailor. It was horrible having 5 days. I mean, I was sick horribly initially, and that whole moving and being in a confined space in the open water with 7 other people. No, not really for me, although I coped and I did it and got on with it. And I remember, like, when you're a child and you say, please, I'll be good if I can just have this. It was kind of, I promise to be good if I could just make it to the other side. You know, if I can see my 40th birthday, I'll be very happy. So the crossing wasn't great. Antarctica was so worth it. It's just a beautiful part of the world, and I'm just editing some footage now. Finally, doing something with the footage from there, and trying to get. I mean, it doesn't compare to being there, but the wildlife and just I don't know why I wanted to ride on there. I guess it was just maybe it was just a ticking the box thing originally. It was let's say, you know, you can say you've ridden on 7 continents, but wow, I can't get over how People came, the Chilean Navy, Ukrainian scientists, Russian icebreakers, all got involved in helping me to achieve that goal of getting that motorbike on board and getting her off again safely. And the video, hopefully, which will be on the blog soon, will sort of show some of that detail. But it was a short ride and a play, and so much effort going into those short moments. But what a feeling. I felt like I could do anything after that. So that's what it was all about, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, certainly something incredibly unique. Like, I think it's amazing. I think it's absolutely incredible. Okay, cool. Well, if people want to see that and find out more about that, where's the best place? Your website address?
Which is onestephbeyond.com.
Yeah. And that's an incredibly catchy website address as well. I did giggle to myself when I first saw that. Well, that's very good. Okay, well that seems like a natural place to kind of tie it up, really. Thank you very much for your time. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
As with most of these podcasts, I could quite happily sit here probably for another 2 or 3 hours and just, listen to some of your stories. It's absolutely incredible. Anyway, thank you very much, and take care.
Thank you. Take care of yourself.
One thing that has become apparent over the course of the podcasts I've recorded so far is that the scariest thing about overlanding is taking the first step, and that generally once you hit the road, there is no turning back. Travelling overland does take guts. To travel alone takes even more guts. I certainly don't claim to know Steph, but one thing that became apparent during our conversation is her innate resilience and passion for what she does. I think you'll agree that Steph's true grit and enthusiasm really shines through when she speaks. You can hear the excitement in her voice when she talks about her adventures, and it's that passion for exploring that is not only motivated by her love of motorcycling, but also her desire to venture further outside her comfort zone. That is inspirational to all of us. If you listen to us via iTunes and Stitcher, please subscribe and write us a review. We love to engage with our listeners, so please find us on Facebook /The Overlanding Podcast. We'd love to hear what you think of the show, so if you can squeeze that into under 140 characters, please tweet us at Overland Podcast. We're incredibly passionate about getting these stories out there, so please share our posts on social media. You can also support the show just by listening and telling others about it around the campfire. If you're an overlander yourself and have an interesting story, we would love to hear from you. We'd especially like to hear from people that undertook overland trips in the 60s, 70s and 80s. You can email us at aroundtheworldin800days@mail.com. Subject heading, podcast interview. Okay, thank you for listening. That is it for this week. Goodbye.